There we go.
Right, okay.
Kevin?
Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning,
Uh,
Kevin.
we've got what I've done is I've put quite a bit of stuff together, and it's regarding Sumatra and Java. Me and Matt have been talking. We're not the greatest experts in the world of Javas, but we've done as best as we can. But I will start the meeting. It's four sections. The first one will be about the evacuation routes from Singapore. Then the Sumatran Railway in the POW camps in Sumatra, and finally Java. I thought maybe I could do a section and maybe stop and maybe have a talk about that section if that's okay with everybody, rather than just go through the whole thing. If that's okay, I'll do that.
If that sounds fine, Kevin.
Yeah, okay. What I'm going to do, I've got my information on the screen, so I'm going to move the video onto another screen. Just 2 minutes. Right. I don't know if you've noticed today, I've put a link on the Facebook page, and it's got links to all the websites which I've used to get all the information from, and also books which have helped me tremendously doing the presentation as well. So that's actually on the family Facebook charity page. Well, okay, so I'll start off. The first section is the evacuation routes from Singapore. The first evacuation route, which was established a few days before Singapore fell, that was across Sumatra to Padang, and it was set up by the SOE under Colonel Warren. It was actually, the escape route was set up and then volunteers kept it going. So the initial escapees actually sailed from Singapore up to the east coast of Sumatra, and then they sailed up the Inaragridi River to Tembela, and that they had a station there where they got supplies, and then they sailed further up the river to Rengat. Again, another station was set up where they could get supplies. And then the final station on the river was a place called Ia Milak. And here, the river did continue across Sumatra, but it became basically impossible for larger ships. So then it became a road journey right across Sumatra to a place called Swaluda, and that was the railhead which linked to Padang. So the people then also got on the train to Padang. And this worked pretty well to start with, but obviously there was organised parties had got across to Sumatra, but there then became people who were just made their own way, and there was a problem at Rengat, one of the stations on the river, where people turned up and they didn't have any money. There was stalls there set up by the Sumatrans. And these people didn't have any money, so they just took all the stores that they wanted at gunpoint, basically, and then continued their journey across Sumatra. So it, as you see, the escape route worked pretty well, and there was ships organised to leave Padang. Most of them were heading towards India, and but of course, obviously, as the war progressed, ships became less and less. For many of the escapees from Singapore, they reached Padang after the last evacuation ships left. A few had to try and attempt escapes using small sailcraft, but most failed. They either got captured or the ship wasn't capable of doing the journey. But there was at least one attempt on a small sailcraft that actually did succeed. And this is, I'm actually researching this because about 6 of my father's company were actually on this ship. So I'm still trying to find how they actually got away. For the rest of the people that got there was no ships. Basically, they were stuck. They basically just had to wait until the Japanese arrived and they became prisoners of war. The second escape route, this was ships leaving Singapore approximately on the 13th of February 1942. Their destination was Java, and if they could, maybe get to Australia. This actually, Friday the 13th, was when most of the ships left. This actually became known as Black Friday.
Yeah.
Because unbeknown to them, all the ships left and they headed straight into the Bangka Strait, and there was an invasion fleet of Japanese who were ready to invade Sumatra and to take over Palembang. So it was a basically complete disaster. Most of the ships got killed, sunk, captured, bombed, and of course there were civilians, women and children on these ships. And the ships themselves were poorly armed. They couldn't fight back against the Japanese naval ships. So basically, they either were captured or, as I say, sunk. But of course, the Japanese had already landed on Bangka Island, and with the ships being sunk, the people either managed to get ashore on Bangka Island, or they were left at sea to be picked up later on. There was one of the ships, I think I'll mention this, there was one of the ships, the Werner Brook, that was bombed and sunk. There were survivors, civilians, soldiers, nurses. And they managed to reach land on a place called the Raji Beach.
Mm-hmm.
The able-bodied survivors left it for the nearest town, but they encountered a Japanese patrol who later headed to the beach. And there were some Australian nurses who had stayed behind to care for the injured. Japanese took any of the able-bodied soldiers that could walk around the headland, and either bayoneted them or shot them. Then they returned to the beach, and they told the nurses to go into the water, and then they opened fire on them with machine guns. One of the survivors, Vivian Bullwilger, who had pretended to be dead, left the area when the Japanese departed, and she was actually scared in case they returned, so she went into the jungle. She came across a Private Kingsley of the ZEOW Royal Ordnance Corps, which was my father's corps. He had actually been bayoneted, but he had also pretended to be dead. She cared for his wounds as best she could, and the two of them left for Muntok town, where they surrendered. Unfortunately, Private Kingsley lived just a few more days and died due to his wounds, but he was able to relate his story. And of course, Vivian Bullwingle survived the POW camps and returned to Australia, where she was also able to relate her story. The other survivors who reached Bangka Island were interned there. Many of the men worked on the construction of an airfield, and then later on they were then transferred to Palembang. So basically, that's the first section of the evacuation from Singapore. Do you want have any comments on that? Or?
I mean, yeah,
Oh, I can't talk this morning. It's a waste of time. The oh, I've no, forget it. I can't. I'm sorry. It's yeah. I'm just gonna listen. I can't contribute on this.
Okay, Matt.
I've got my file here with all the things, and the massacre of the nurses. I've read the book, and it's yeah, it was a terrible time, but not just for them, for a lot of people. But I'm just gonna sit out this one, and listen listen and watch. So behave yourselves. I'm listening.
Yeah, Kevin, there's a New Zealander called Michael Pether
Oh, yes,
who
yes,
is doing a lot of work on the evacuation ships
yes,
and
yes.
finding out what information he can, which is obviously it's on the FEPOW site. I don't know whether it's on others. It may well be, maybe on the MVG site as well. But you get the particular one that I've got to try and find for him when I can get up to the Imperial War Museum is a RAF tender called the Aquarius. Now, this left Singapore carrying, they reckon, about 50 people, caught and sunk, 3 survivors. They all died before they could give any details of who was on the ship. So we just don't know. It's things like that, isn't it, that sort of
Yes.
brings it home. There's Royal Artillery escape parties who seem to have disappeared when they reached a certain island. Only the evidence by a Dutch priest that was on that island indicates what may have happened to them. They certainly didn't leave the island, that's for sure. So it's one of these horrible periods of time where I don't suppose we're ever going to know who was on those ships in full.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, see that's the trouble. We called Michael. I've actually been in contact with him, and he's done a very, very, very good job on the evacuation ships. He's found a lot more information that I thought we'd ever find, really. But I don't know if you were here. That I've put a link on the Facebook page of all the websites and books and stuff like that I use for my research. And I have put Michael's evacuation ships from the FEPOW. I put a link to that on there. As I say, anybody who wants to look into it further, that's the place to go, really. Yeah. That's part of actually part of the thing about my talk. It's impossible to be like go into all the fine detail. That's why I put that link on, because if anybody really wants to look at it in more depth, them links have some really, really good information on them. Really good. Of course, the books are good. As I said, there's the Singapore Dunkirk.
Yeah,
that's a good book. That's an excellent book for evacuation ships. So yeah, that's why I put the link on. It's on the charity page, the Facebook charity page.
Okay.
If anybody wants to have a look at that.
Thank you. Will do.
Is anything else on? Oh.
Well, I must admit, sorry, for the past 3 weeks I've been out of action, so I've not done any research.
Yeah. How are you feeling now, Keith? Are you okay?
Yeah. It's getting there. I've got rid of the bandage, so it's just a plaster at the moment. That's got to be redressed on Tuesday, probably a smaller plaster, and then it's physio. So until they say, well, Mr. Andrews, yes, well done, you can now drive, no chance, because I've been told very, very straight by the consultant that if you drive without being signed off and you do have an accident, whether it's your fault or not, number one, your insurance will not cover you. Number two, if you injure anybody, you could open yourself to a court case. And number three, you're breaking the law. So I'm afraid it's no queue until I'm up and running again. But once I'm up and running again, I'll dive straight back into it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'll continue on now with the next section I had done, which was the actual prisoner of war camps in Pelham. But just before that, I think I'll do a little section on the invasion of Pelham, because I think I don't know if you've all watched the video I put on there. The Japanese were mainly after the oil in Sumatra and the Dutch East Indies. That was the main reason for invasion. In Pelham, we had a massive oil refinery there, and they also had a oil reserve, which was supposed to be the best oil reserve in the whole of the Dutch East Indies. So Pelham was really a good target for the Japanese. So I'll go through the actual invasion part of it. In January 1942, the Allied Air Force, which had been in Malaya, obviously Malaya was being taken over by the Japanese, so they actually moved them to Pelham. And there was two airfields in Pelham called P1 and P2. The names of the places are there. This is one problem I've got, is actually the pronunciation of the names. It is pretty difficult, I must admit. So I'll just refer to them as P1 and P2, these two airfields.
Lesser of the two evils.
So on the 13th of February 1942, an actual spotter plane seen this Japanese invasion fleet heading towards the Bangka Strait, and they obviously radioed that back to the airfields, and the Air Force attacked the Japanese invasion force. But they did some damage, obviously, but they didn't stop this invasion force from heading into the Bangka Strait. But at the same time, the Japanese launched a paratrooper assault on the Air Force Base P1. And also they did a paratroop drop on the oil refinery to try and capture it. Obviously, the Air Force Base was a prime target. They could knock that out, then it would stop the planes attacking their fleet. But as it turned out, the attack on the Air Force Base was repelled. But the Japanese successfully took over the oil refinery, and they hung on to that for a bit. But the Dutch militia did a counterattack on the oil refinery and retook it. Then they were told they had to destroy it. Obviously, they knew they were never going to stop the Japanese, so they were thought, well, we'll destroy the oil refinery and stop the Japanese getting it. And they had a go, but they didn't do a very good job of it. All they did was set fire to the oil storage tanks. So anyway, the main Japanese invasion force actually arrived, and basically at Pelham, the defences was not up to the task of stopping the Japanese. And all the aircraft were actually ordered to leave Pelham and go to Java. And also the men who were protecting the Air Force Base, they were also told to leave. And one of the men who was actually on P1 duties as an anti-aircraft gunner was Tim Lloyd's dad. And Tim Lloyd's actually got in touch with him, and he said that they took some of their guns and tried to get to the coast nearest Java off Sumatra, but they couldn't get their guns on the ship, so that they destroyed them, and then they left for Java. The Dutch forces who were left, basically they just had to retreat. They retreated back into the middle of Sumatra and headed towards the north, and the Japanese took over Pelham. As regards the prisoners, as I said, you've seen about the ship. Most of the ships were captured in the Bangka Strait. The prisoners ended up on Bangka Island, and as you see, they worked there for a while. Some of the men were constructing an airfield. But after about 4 or 5 weeks, they were transferred to Pelham. And the initial camps that they had, there was a mixture of military personnel, civilians, But the Japanese decided to sort that out, and they had specific prison camps for civilian women, civilian men, and had 2 prison camps for the military. And the men were separated into them 2 camps. One was called the Chunghwa School, and one was called the Mullo School. And they stayed in there until about 1944, and then they built a purpose camp called Sunijiron. Now this was outside of the town. The Japanese did that for a reason. Initially, in the first 2 camps, the men had opportunities to go into the town. They were working in the town, working on the docks. They were actually extending the airfield, and they gave them a chance to interact with the Sumatrans. They were getting food, could buy food. They were getting information. But as the war progressed, it became more and more obvious that the Japanese were going to get defeated. The Japanese decided they want to control the prisoners more, and that's why they built this last camp, Sunijiron. And they moved them in there in 1944. The Sunijiron was a pretty bad camp. As I say, the Japanese were much more controlling towards the POWs. And by 1945, the food rations were beginning to become pretty scarce. And the POWs were getting about 1/3 of a cup of rice per day. And they were actually reduced to scavenging in the guards' bins for banana skins or vegetables, whatever they could get. So you can imagine that that began to take the toll on the men's health, and the death rate actually skyrocketed. The example was in the beginning, in February 1945, in 1 month, 3 POWs died. By the month of August 1945, 109 prisoners died in that month. It became pretty bad. But my father, he actually worked as an orderly in the makeshift hospital. But the strain of just looking after the men, it actually took a massive toll on him, physically and mentally. And he actually had a complete breakdown when news came through that the Japanese had actually surrendered. And he actually became a patient himself. And so one of the stories I would like to relate was that when the Japanese surrendered, obviously the powers to be were going to try and repatriate the POWs. And Edwina Mountbatten, is Lord Mountbatten's wife, she toured the camp. And this is a section that was in her diary. No praise can be too high for what the doctors, the surgeons, and the orderlies have done in the camps. Even though they had no medical supplies, drugs, or equipment, the way they improvised was quite staggering. I spent nearly a week in Sumatra. The Japanese did what we told them, and we eventually succeeded in evacuation of the British, Australian, and Indian prisoners by boat, also Dakota aircraft flown from hastily improved airstrips. On the whole, the evacuation went extraordinarily well, considering the vast area covered. In Sumatra, we evacuated all the prisoners of war without a single Allied soldier landed or the Navy lying offshore. Luckily it worked, and there were no doubt that had the war gone on for a few more weeks, there would not have been any prisoners of war left alive. They were absolutely on their last gasp, and the tragedy is that so many did die in the last few weeks before the surrender, and even after it. My father was evacuated, if possible, by a hospital ship to Australia, and he began his journey home. It was almost taken 6 months to get home. So that's that section on the FEPOW camps. Any comments on that from him?
Well, I'm feeling very guilty, Kevin, because I sent you a question about the amounts of food that the prisoners received. This was put forward by one of the members at our meeting, Hazel. And maybe you explained it actually that because her father died out there anyway, that to begin with they were allowed out into the villages and could get food. Maybe she was referring to that, because from what you're saying, you know, they were absolutely starved and on their,
Right.
you know, on their last reserves when, goodness, the Japanese did surrender. So I've sat here feeling quite guilty for asking that question, but it wasn't mine. It did attract some attention from people that their fathers, you know, had been down to sort of 55, well, 5 stone, £5 when they were released. So I don't know where it came from that, unless it was on Java, that some of the prisoners actually received better rations than they had in Singapore. So sorry about that question. It was done on behalf of that.
It's a genuine question. It's a bona fide question, Barbara.
Well, I did ask Ron, our FEPOW, you know, who had been in Java, but I think he obviously went up the railway anyway and returned to Changi, so he missed perhaps the latter part of Java and Sumatra. But it was a question that she wanted to ask, and I can understand from what you're saying that if they were allowed to go out and you know, make contact with the locals, that they probably were to begin with in better condition and able to receive extra supplies. And it's just so sad to hear how it ended up for them. And I'm glad that Lady Mount put that in her diary to illustrate, you know, the dire circumstances. So thank you, Kevin, for that.
Yeah. Well, of course, the other thing is the opportunity to steal things as well while they were out. You know, there was stealing. Maybe they were unloading the ships, and they were stealing some of the food was actually being brought in. As you say, the opportunities actually were then limited. Once they put into that last camp, that was it. They didn't have any opportunity of doing anything really, and it was basically just hanging on for survival really.
I suppose it was the same on the Sumatra Railway as well, Kevin.
Yeah. There's that's the next section, Ron. Keith, I'm going to do the Sumatra Railway. I've got that's actually, as I say, it's amazing. You do a little bit of looking into it, and you come across information. It's quite staggering. So if it's okay, I'll go on to that. I'll go on to the.
Kevin, it's Ray here. Just have one question. Was there any support from local inhabitants, you know, who were from villages or anything like that?
Oh yeah, as I say, when the initial camps were in, as I say, they were out and about in the towns and stuff like that, and the people would help them. They would give them food or whatever, or they could actually barter for it. I mean, probably that's by the end of the war, they had nothing left because they'd give away clothes and shoes, watches, anything for bartering for food. Yeah. But of course, there was in Palembang, there was actually a big community of Chinese, and they were absolutely bad, really terribly treated by the Japanese. The Japanese absolutely hated the Chinese, and of course, the Chinese would help if they could the prisoners, just because they hated the Japanese, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'll move on to the which will be the Sumatran Railway, but I'll just put the finishing bit about the Dutch, because the Dutch were still fighting the Japanese in Sumatra even after Palembang fell. But what they did is as I say, they retired to the middle of Sumatra. The island itself is massive. You can imagine it's a huge place. And the Japanese actually followed the Dutch, didn't give them a chance to actually get back and consolidate their position. The Japanese were kept at them all the time. And the Dutch finally come to the river and they were going to like make a stand there. And the Japanese only had a force of about 700 men. And the Dutch were on the verge of actually having a counter-attack against the Japanese when news came through about Java on the 8th of March. About Java had basically capitulated on the 8th of March. And the Dutch then thought, well, we may as well just go defensive. We'll try and hang on, and hopefully somebody will come and evacuate them. But unfortunately, what happened was the Japanese, which had obviously taken over Malaya and Singapore by that time, they then landed in the north of Sumatra. So basically, the Dutch were now trapped between two forces. And they had no choice. They had to surrender on the 28th of March. They surrendered with over 2,000 soldiers, Dutch soldiers. And many of them actually ended up on the Sumatran Railway. But a sad note of that was that the general in charge of the Dutch forces, he was called Major General Overtaker. He signed the surrender. But as the war progressed, again, the Japanese knew that they were going to lose the war. They actually shot him. It's like basically vindictiveness, really. As I say, a lot of them soldiers then went on to the Sumatran Railway. But if I go back to the start about where the evacuees had got to Padang, they couldn't escape, and they were captured. Some of them, the Japanese rounded them up. They had a party sent away to do some work on roadworks, but they rounded and there was a group of them became known as the Sumatran Battalion under Captain Dudley Althorpe. He was from the Royal Norfolk Regiment, and they were made up of just various different regiments. They became a group of basically battalion strength. Well, the Japanese didn't know what to do with them, so what they did is to actually ship them out from Sumatra, and they ended up in Burma. And they worked on the railway and various projects in Burma. Then they decided, the Japanese thought, well, we'll build a railway. We've got Padang, which is a good port on the Indian Ocean. It's a good way we can get supplies into there, but we've got to get them across the country. So they decided there was an existing railway went so far to a place called Murano. So they decided that they would build a railway from there to Pekanbaru. The Pekanbaru, when you look at the map, it looks about in the middle of the country. You think, well, what's the point of that? But there was actually a river went all the way from the other side of Sumatra to Pekanbaru. So they decided, right, we'll build a railway from Pekanbaru to Murano, and that became the Sumatran Railway. But, of course, they needed more men to do that. And this is one thing that Barbara, actually, I'd like to thank you for putting me on this, Rod. It's about the Ramusha. Now, they wanted to clear the jungle. You can imagine a dense jungle in the middle of Sumatra. And they needed a massive amount of labour to do that. And what they did is they got them from Java. Now, there's varying numbers of Ramushu who were brought for Java. The worst one I've got is that 120,000 of Indonesians were transported into Sumatra to work on the Sumatran Railway. And basically their job was to clear the jungle, dig the cuttings, whatever. They had to be done. They did all the hard work. And it's absolutely staggering to know that out of them 120,000 Ramusha, only 16,000 survived. Absolutely staggering, that. I mean, they're talking about nearly 90% who died. Unbelievable. And of course, at the end of the war, the military men were evacuated. The Ramusha were just left for their own devices, just said they won't even do anything. Most of them actually just stayed there and lived there. So that is actually staggering for me. When I read that, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it might be an exaggeration number, but you're still talking about well over 100,000 them working on that railway. Terrible. But of course, along with the Ramusha, there was about 6,500 Dutch, about 1,000 British, and about 1,000 other POWs, and there was some from Australia, America, New Zealand. But the ironic thing about this whole thing was that when the railway was actually finished, it finished on the day the Japanese surrendered. So the railway never got used for its purpose. The only thing the railway was actually used for was repatriating the POWs, which again, it's a staggering thing. They spent all that manpower, time to build a railway which never got used. And yeah, it's a pretty bad place to be, I suppose. The Sumatran Railway, pretty tragic, really, especially the Ramusha. That was for me that it was unbelievable to read that statistic. But of course, at the end of the war, the prisoners were actually repatriated, and the railway basically fell into disuse. So that's the section on the Sumatran movement. There's the links are put there. There's obviously websites go into that much more detail. There's some excellent websites on the Sumatran Railway. I'd really say it if you wanted to have a look at that. I would go to them. They're pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're right, Kevin. The story of the Ramusha needs to be told, needs to be recognised for their suffering, which was, I hate to say it, because the FEPOWs are what matters to us, but they suffered even more than our men did, and at the end of the war were just left to their own devices. I'm going to have a little bit of a say to Keith. Keith, I did notice that the Co-FEPOW Memorial Stone just the other side of the Lich Gate at the NMA is for the FEPOWs and the internees, and it doesn't mention the Ramusha. And I'd had a long conversation at the recent AGM with Patrick Toosey, and I almost said to him, look, you're the one who got me onto the Ramusha. Why can't we have the Ramusha added to that memorial stone? So Keith, as a member of Co-FEPOW and somebody who has been stunned by the stories of the Ramusha, can't we add in some way the Ramusha to that memorial stone for next year for VJ 75, because they're part of that story?
That memorial stone, Barbara, was commissioned by the FEPOW Federation, not Co-FEPOW. So the quick answer to you is going to be no. But
yeah, sorry, but it's just something I feel that we're missing.
Yeah, we are. Don't get me wrong, and please don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. But the building was built to commemorate British Far Eastern POWs, because there was nothing in this country to commemorate them at all. Yeah. I know there is something about the Ramusha on the Sumatra Railway one. Mm-hmm. When I was speaking to somebody who knows the dance art more than I do, and I think the figure was something like 23,000, he said, you can multiply that by 4. Yeah. So this bears out what Kevin's saying. Suddenly you're getting up to the 90-odd thousand mark. Yeah. I can certainly have a word with the trustees and see what we can do on that, just to bring it, bring it to people's attention. I don't know. I'd have to check what's in the building as well. Yeah. But yes, they aren't recognised, and they need to be recognised. But that stone there, that memorial stone, was built by the Federation, as was the board.
I'll take that on board. Okay. Yeah. It is just that it's Patrick Toosey, who obviously is one of the trustees. It's his. No, he got me sort of into looking at their situation and what happened to them. Perhaps for next year it would be nice to have something added for them in recognition of their suffering, which the world doesn't see, because we stand up for our FEPOWs, and the other countries do too, but the Ramusha don't have anybody. told their story.
It's incredible that the Japanese were such great record keepers that they never kept names. You know, I mean, certainly I found some war crimes reports from people or Ramusha recruited in, say, Burma, but they're all about the bad treatment and all the rest of it. So you don't get a lot of names. There's no defined list of all those people that, for argument's sake, were enrolled in Burma at the Burma end of the railway.
Yeah.
Likewise, the Malays and Tamils and all the rest of it on the Thailand end of the railway. So I find it incredible that information doesn't appear to have been kept.
But then I think that the Japanese were also, I won't call them racist. You know, it's a war, so they're out to get what they want. But they had so little respect. When you look at what they did to the Chinese, the hatred is there. And it's almost as though, well, they were there to be used, you know, and they tricked them. A lot of them were tricked into what they were meant to do.
This is it.
With promises of wages and everything. And they were merely pawns in a game. And as such, they weren't given names or identities, you know. And I can understand perhaps how that could happen, but it's cruel because they're not remembered. When you look at memorials and you can see names of those who died, those families way back never knew what even happened to their loved ones who were sent
they just
out.
disappeared without a trace.
Just disappeared. Yeah, and some of them took their families with them, their children and wives, and they all perished or were left away with no help or support. I mean, the internees a lot of them suffered badly enough at the end of the war because the military were repatriated and helped. And the internees, most of them had to pay for their own trips home. So it's a sad part of history, although it was the end of the war. It didn't always end well for a lot of people.
No, I mean, internees, they were allowed to be repatriated to a country of their choice. So if, for argument's sake, a chap knows his wife and kids are in Australia, he'd go to Australia.
Yeah.
But when he wanted to get to England, you've got to pay for that passage, which I think we're sitting here now and it feels grossly unfair. It really does.
We were bankrupt at the end of the war, though. We couldn't help anybody.
Yeah, that's right. No, we were totally bankrupt at the end of the war. I don't think we finished paying off for World War II until the 80s.
That's right, or later.
But it's interesting. I've read a couple of books, and there is one by a Japanese author. I've got the title of it somewhere. It really opens your eyes to the attitude of the Japanese towards the other races. And I think, I'm going to have to be very careful how I word this. Perhaps it is indeed fortunate that they went as conquerors or acted as conquerors and not liberators. And there were a number of people in the Japanese government that voiced that opinion, and they were very swiftly removed from office by the military.
But a lot of these people were taken in thinking they were being liberated by the Japanese.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah.
So it was a two-edged sword, literally.
The Thais were in theory cooperating with the Japanese, which is not strictly true, but it was looked on that by the Brits at the time. But even the Thais started being treated by the Japanese as if they were just second-rate citizens. The other side of the coin, I suppose, is yes, I know the Ramusha aren't remembered, but interestingly enough, there was a party about 18 months ago of Japanese students at the National Archives looking for information on the war graves of Japanese soldiers in Burma and other areas, because they didn't go home either. The only ones that I know that were actually repatriated were the men who were buried in Singapore, I believe, but I'm going to have to check that out. But it wasn't men, it's ashes. Sorry, the Japanese didn't bury bodies. They buried the ashes. So we in the West are extremely fortunate. We have outfits like the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and other outfits within the Allied areas that do remember the men who passed away, the men who died. And there are memorials and graveyards for them. Ramusha, I think that's
They're
one of the
just
greatest
forgotten.
tragedies. One of the
Yeah,
greatest
just
tragedies
forgotten.
of the war in the
Yeah.
Far East.
Yeah, and I also, in doing this, sorry, Kevin, to be that, but
Oh, no,
when
no.
I look at what happened before the war started over there, right, but the Japanese, what they did in China, we pay respect to the Jewish Holocaust. Having read some books, I think there was a second Holocaust, and that
Oh
was
yes, that was in
China,
China.
and
Yeah.
we don't recognise that, and that makes me angry too. But when you look at the figures and what cruelty went on there, the World War II had two Holocausts, not one, and we should remember the Chinese that were slaughtered by the Japanese there.
Yeah, but I mean,
So
it's
that Holocaust and the Ramusha are two really sad sides.
But it's
of
like
that.
we always talk about the war in the Pacific was from the 7th of December 1941. No, it wasn't. In reality, it kicked off in 1931 in China. That's why you'll find that the Chinese probably aren't remembered as they should be by the Allied powers.
Yeah.
I believe they are
And
by the
sadly,
Chinese.
they aren't remembered in their own country either, are they? Because of what happened with the communists after the war. They tend
Yes,
to be forgotten over there. Yeah, history.
yeah.
It needs to be rewritten properly. Sorry, Kevin. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Actually, Keith, I was going to ask you, the thing about the Ramusha and the Sumatra Railway, was it as bad as that on the Thai-Burma Railway?
The figure I believe has been bandied about. We're not too sure. I mean, if anybody knows, it would be Rod, or would have a better idea. It would be Rod Beattie and the team, and I can certainly try and ask them. But I know in one particular area, which is Kinsai Oak, where they were really pushing this 29-kilometre embankment to be built, like there was no tomorrow. Rod stood up on a TV program and said, "We know somewhere in this area there are 50,000 Ramusha buried, completely unmarked, and that's just a one segment." So I've heard the figure of 100,000 bandied about, but I cannot quote that as a definite. And the reason I can't quote it as a definite is nobody really knows how many were on there. This is the tragedy of it.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, but basically they're just estimates, really. It's an estimate. Yeah, it's not.
I mean, you could be looking at about 250,000.
Yeah, as I say, it's quite staggering. Quite staggering.
I mean, I wonder whether, like in places like Formosa, were any of the locals used there in the various camps. We don't tend to hear much about that, but it does. You think to yourself, well, it does make you wonder a bit. But there again, Formosa was a Japanese colony before the war, as indeed was Korea.
Yes. Okay, well, the final part is Java. As I say, been talking to Matt. Java is really not an area I've had really studied very well. Basically, what I can go through is it's the invasion of Java. It was absolutely amazing how fast Java capitulated. There was two invasions, an East invasion force and a West invasion force, and basically the resistance basically just collapsed. The Dutch, the British, the Australians had no chance against them. In fact, actually, one of the main targets in the West by the Japanese was an airfield, and they basically captured that straight away. And then that afternoon, they started using it to bomb the rest of Java. I'm staggered to believe that it was about the 28th of February when the Japanese invaded, and by the 8th of March, they had surrendered. It was unbelievable. And of course, on the west part, probably about 30,000 Dutch, Indo-European, Australian, British, Americans who became POWs. But the majority of them, from what I've read, is they were actually transported out of Java. They went to Burma, Thailand, Japan, Sumatra, like I mentioned, back to Singapore. Actually, Tim Lloyd's dad, he was in his dad got shipped out to Japan from Java. But again, as I say, I don't really know a lot about Java, but I did find quite a lot of good links for that, and there's some excellent ones on Ronnie's Far Eastern Heroes.
Yeah.
They're like personal accounts of like Java. There was actually one of Tim Lloyd's his anti-aircraft battery. There's actually a story by another man about that, and he goes through the whole thing from Singapore to Java, then getting transported from Java to Japan. So as I say, the links are well worth reading. You're going to find a lot more about Java than what I know. As I say, it's a very limited knowledge. In fact, what I know now is just what I've been reading up on for this.
There is a very, very good book, very good book, Kevin, and I haven't got the title with me, but it is on the fall of Kalajati Airfield, which is the Java one you're talking about. Excellent book, because once that fell, that was it. It was in the middle of the island. The other thing that came to light as well, and I forget where I was reading this one, regarding the escapes, and when the Dutch authority said we would like to declare Bandayong an open city, Japanese said fine. You know what that means? Surrender your arms. No escapes. So there were a couple of escapes that were intercepted by a Dutch patrol ship, and they realised they were Dutch police, so they said, "Look, we can use your ship, we can get away." And the commander said, "I can't do that." He said, "They've got our families. We've got to bring you in. It's part of the surrender terms. We have to bring you back." So they were between a rock and a very hard place. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I found doing a little bit of research into it, there was a lot of the Javanese actually in the Dutch army that fought for them. And of course, when the Japanese invaded, it was this like what you and Barbara were talking about. They thought the Japanese were the liberators, and they actually just deserted from the army. They basically swept the legs from under the Dutch army in Java.
Yeah.
But of course, once they found out what the Japanese were like, then they realised they'd made a big mistake. That's it for me. The talk. If there's anything else anybody would like to bring up about it, that's. Sorry about the Java part. As I say, it's not really my area of expertise, but
well, no.
As I say, I hope I redeem myself by putting them links on.
Well, because... yeah. I mean, to be fair, Kevin, it's like a lot of documentation. There's not a lot of it regarding some of the Java units, although if you do a bit of digging, there is some. But it's something that there's not a lot of not as readily available as Singapore. Let's put it that way. So I think anything anybody comes up with on Java and Sumatra is a bonus, absolute bonus. When I first started all this, somebody said, "Oh, my father was captured on Java." What? What's that going to do with Singapore? And it's not until you start reading the story. Oh my Lord! I'm not just looking at one small area. I'm looking at the whole of the Pacific, basically.
Yeah, because sorry, Kevin. I was going to say our own FEPOW, who is part of our club, was captured in Java, but was then shipped across and worked with, what was it, H-Force?
H-Force, yeah. I think it was H-Force Train 5, I believe.
That's it, yes. And then back down to Changi. So, I mean, they moved them around remarkably, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Kevin, I think what you've put together was brilliant. And I think what you put on the Facebook to start with, so that we could all familiarise ourselves, was very useful, a really useful tool. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Very, very worthwhile.
Yeah, there was the one thing about that. It's actually surprised me. The Japanese came up with that plan to invade the Dutch East Indies. And when you think about it, that was I mean, we all obviously not the best people in the world to us, but that plan was put together and executed, and I think that said that they completed it with the fall of Java, if you like. Within 2 months, that their plan was to would have went on for another 2 months. They actually completed it 2 months early.
Yeah,
It was
we did a thing in our group. We do small services every now and again, but they're not really a religious service. We actually tell the history, and one of our members did this particular thing of how the Japanese did, because they based it on what some of the Germans did in their attacks, and it was sort of a blitzkrieg where they worked their way, sort of bump, bump, bump on all the different islands. And considering they're only a small nation with basically small resources, what they did was an amazing feat of, war. It was so well planned. You have to admire their strategy that they involved in doing it, and it had an horrendous effect, because I don't think any of the Allied forces ever anticipated that they could move with such speed and effectiveness across the Far East. So you have to sort of pay tribute in a way to their military planners who managed to.
And long term they achieved their aim, didn't they?
Yeah,
Britain lost its empire, the Dutch, the French, all went.
Yeah, it was amazing what they achieved. And when you think about where it started off in Manchuria and worked its all way around, they were very good at what they did. So I admire them for that. Hate them for other things.
Well,
and hope our team do well in the rugby.
As Admiral Yamamoto said to the Japanese emperor, "Give me 6 months, I can run wild. After that,
and he did.
All bets are off."
Yeah. And having just wished the English team well, I've got to say happy birthday to a certain young Bernard, and hope that Welsh do well too. Happy birthday, Bernard.
Yeah, 21 Bernard.
Yeah, happy
I hope Matt's all right.
Adam's doing well, stay iawn.
Pardon? You swearing
Stay
at me?
iawn. Stay iawn. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I say, before we go, could I also mention that I noticed Ronnie's starting to do a thing about the civilian internings. There was quite loads of civilians were captured in the Banker Strait and places like that. In the website, the One Talk Peace Museum, that's the place to go for the civilian information about civilian internings. That's on that link as well.
I've got something here which I know isn't quite relevant to your speech, but we're talking about the civilians. My mum, who's 92 in a few days, we're off to take her out for lunch now. We're starting to sort out some things, and you may not see this very clearly. But this came out of a book of hers, and my husband was reading it because it was a very old book, and my mum's nearly 92. And this is a bookmark from the British Red Cross, and this is actually part of the Changi quilt. And I thought that was interesting that the Red Cross had used it at some point. I don't know how old this is, probably not old. But on the back, bless my husband for pointing this out to me, it actually says the design featured on the front of this bookmark has been taken from one of the panels of the Changi quilt, which was made by women imprisoned in Singapore during the Second World War. This is the interesting bit that I didn't know. Encouraged by a Red Cross representative. And I was going to actually point this out to Liam, but Liam's not with us today. He's got other things to go and do. So, Sophie, we were talking, sorry if I'm going off the track, we were talking about ways of getting children to learn about the Far East. And we were talking about the internees, children, and perhaps that. But actually, the quilt is a wonderful way of doing it. You might have seen it last year. There was a lot on Facebook, or maybe earlier this year, about the Changi quilt. And to me, that's an ideal way through art classes of getting children to learn a little bit about the World War II in the Far East by creating their own quilts. It doesn't have to be sewn, they can be painted. But I was just amazed that my dear husband pointed this out and he says, "Do you know what that's off?" No. And he said it's taken from the Changi quilt. So I do think that children could learn by doing something like the Changi quilt. So Sophie, I know you were going to perhaps have a word with the teachers at school. Maybe encourage them to do something like the Changi quilt for next year.
I mean, I'd say Liam's unfortunately playing his PlayStation today, and I'm sat outside in our garden. So if I've got some weird connections on me, it's off umbrellas and things like that, which I'm trying to sit out the sun now. But yeah, I've noticed that having received the sort of full terms rundown of events and things, that actually some of the classes are doing stuff to do with World War II, but not Liam's class. And I don't know whether it's sort of linked into the curriculum and they have to follow that or something. But I don't typically go to the school much because of my job doesn't allow me to go and do sort of pickups, drop-offs. But we do have the parents' evening coming up on the 9th of October. So that will be my opportunity to collar his class teacher then and actually say, well, you know, are you going to be doing something about this? Perhaps it would be a nice idea. And, you know, it would be useful to maybe have, you know, if I could go back and I think I remember seeing a Facebook post from a lady who was a teacher and her class had made a quilt.
They've done it.
If I could go back and find that to show it to him and say, look, you know, like this, it's a really good thing to teach children.
I don't know whether Meg Parks and Professor Gill are featuring the Changi quilt at the Art of Survival, so you know there may be more coming up with that. But it was just interesting. It was out of this old book that my husband was looking through. That he put that in front of me and shamed me because I had no idea what it was from.
Can I just add here, Barbara and Kevin? You may know that one of my other interests is in Normandy veterans because my father was a Normandy veteran, and I am involved with a branch of the Stockport Normandy veterans, quite heavily involved, and we have just had a very, very successful launch of an educational programme into all of the schools in the Stockport area.
Fabulous.
We have in June, just after the D-Day commemorations, we had a launch of our what we call the Legacy Project, where we've invited primary schools to do a class project on the Second World War, hopefully Normandy, but anything to do with the Second World War, and how it connects with the local area. You know, what was the war like, but also what was it like for people in Stockport. And the second part of the project is aimed at secondary school children, and where they're invited to do an essay, and that's an individual one. And we've gone out to all of the schools in Stockport, had a tremendous response back from them, including the education authorities at the local authority. And it's also gone up to what's called the Spirit of Normandy Trust, which is a charity, a nationwide charity, and we are incorporated in their national competition. So any entries that we receive at Stockport will be automatically entered into the national competition. And already we've had a couple of projects that have been given first-class commendations by the organising committee at Spirit of Normandy Trust. And we're obviously delighted with the way that we've gone out to the schools. And I think one of the successes about it is that up until we launched this project, we were thinking that we went into the schools to try and encourage children of all ages. We took veterans, we've always done it for years, taken veterans into local schools, had a chat, even around Remembrance Day. We've held Remembrance Day services with the schools in their assemblies. But this project is quite different because the schools are coming to us. You know, we can't possibly go to the 120 different educational establishments in Stockport to spread the word. But now they're coming to us. And as I say, some of the exhibits are fantastic. Last weekend we held heritage at the church where we meet in Stockport, and the primary school attached to the church produced their project, which was a paper mache model of Warhorse from the First World War. I mean, that it's fantastic to see that this had been done by the school children, and it really was the centre of attention, and it's just encouraged by our group launching this project and sort of generating the enthusiasm within the schools. And I really do think that if we are talking about trying to educate our kids at school level to understand and learn about our FEPOWs, then maybe we should start thinking of doing something similar. I don't know, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money, but we have raised £5,000 through grants and donations and very generous people that we have around us. But we have enough money to run this project for 5 years, and that's probably about the amount of energy that we've got to keep it going. But we are doing something in just one little part of the country in Stockport, and hopefully it will become part of the curriculum, which now, of course, the Second World War is part of the educational curriculum, and hopefully we can keep it going like that. So that's a bit of trumpet blowing. We're quite proud of it, but we have achieved something, and I think we're very pleased with that.
Ray, I think that's absolutely amazing. Well done, well done.
Yeah, well done, Ray.
Well done. That's what we need, that sort of thing. Okay, as you say, it started from the Normandy group, but hopefully, you can put little feelers out and spread it. And
Well, I mean, one of my sort of dilemmas really was which hat to wear, the Normandy hat or the FEPOW hat. And of course, really, you should just wear one big hat. I know, but because we're sponsoring it from the Normandy veterans side, I have sort of kept a low profile of FEPOWs. But there's no reason why, in your own local community, something like this can't be started. We can provide a template if somebody's enthusiastic enough to do this. We can very, very happily talk to you about how we've gone about it.
I don't know if I dare take it on at the moment, but I would love to have the information if you can send it to me, Ray. Because if not inspiring, well, it would inspire me, but it's trying to inspire others. It was sad to see that a similar thing that was tried a few years ago by COFEPO, it just never hit the mark, really, which was a shame. And this year would have probably been a good year to do it,
Yeah, I think that I remember that, Barbara, and I think that where that broke down was that we were relying on members of COFEPO to go to the schools, and that's the difference. There's too many schools for individuals to go to.
Absolutely.
So you've got to get the schools to come to you, and that we seem to have found a way of doing that.
Yeah, that's the way about it, isn't it? But then, of course, they're stuck with curriculums and what they, they're so overloaded, aren't they, already with their curriculums and every.
Well, they are, but what we found was that the teachers were kind of inspired. They were looking for ideas how to do, how to get class engaged, and everybody taking a part of it. And of course, going back to families, the primary school children talking to their granddads and grandmas, and yes, these memories are then drawn out from the family and get fed back to the class. Oh.
Well, to me, what we were talking about last time, and I was talking to Sophie with Liam, that to draw a comparison to what they do with in Europe, where they do the stories of the evacuees. They could do, imagine being a child where you're captured by the Japanese, and then, as I say, this reminded me that anybody doing an art class or needlework, that's not done so much now, could do an art project and talk about it and talk about, what happened in their lives. So you've got two instantly accessible methods of introducing the Far Eastern prisoner of war into a curriculum, but it's getting the schools to see it that way, isn't it, really? And next year we can go for it, hopefully.
One of the schools that Meg Parks is involved in, I think, has produced its own version of the Changi quilt.
Yeah, they have.
And they're also doing something as well with David Arkush's dentist chair. Yeah,
the bamboo chair. Yeah, and that'll be at the Art of Survival.
Yep.
which isn't far away now.
No,
wish them
it's
luck.
not, is it?
No,
Yeah.
wish them luck. I got an invitation to that evening, the opening evening, but I can't go, so I'm really sad about that. But I'll be there in November. Hope the rest of you will be able to go in November.
Yeah.
Too.
I'm going to hopefully going to the October one. That'll be trains and all the rest of it, so it's not a problem. November one as well. Yes.
Yeah. The Monday I know is fully booked, but we'll go on the Saturday. Go to the things on the Sunday too, because there's a big service. If anybody's interested, on the pier head at the church there, and if any of you were there when the repatriation memorial was opened, you'll remember it was a real wonderful service with the skirl of the pipes coming up the Mersey on a boat and things like that. When that plaque was unveiled. And at that time, I didn't know that my father had been repatriated to Liverpool. A few days later, when I got his papers and things out, then I found that he'd returned on the Orduna on the 19th of October, which was just 8 days after that repatriation memorial was unveiled. It's spooky how things crop up, isn't it? But there you go. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Can I just ask, I've not seen any information about the opening of the Art of Survival. In fact, I was asking the question the other day, when does it open? When does it start? What are the events? Where do we look?
Look on
the 19th of October.
RFHG website.
Yeah.
You're searching for the History Group website. Should be on there.
I did look, but I couldn't see anything.
The art exhibition opens on the 24th of October. That's the first night. And then the other exhibition running with it will open on the 15th of November, I believe. Or I'm sorry, I'm there on the 15th of November, and it's the Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday for a private tour of people. It's been probably all booked up now.
The Monday is fully booked up.
Yeah, so it's the 16th and 17th.
Yeah.
I'll be coming home on the Monday.
Yeah, we're coming home on the Monday. Yeah. So and it's open until next June, Ray. So there's plenty of time to go and have a look at it.
Plenty of time. I must say, without trying to offend anybody, I'm a little bit disappointed, having been a patron to, donated some money towards it, that I've not received any further information. No.
All right.
Did you not get an invitation?
I'll drop a note to Meg.
No, it's just gone completely off the radar as far as I'm concerned. That's why I was asking the question.
Because there is somebody else organising it. It's not Meg actually organising it.
No, but I think that other person that took over, sadly, seemed to disappear off the radar, because I've ended up emailing her, but CCing in Meg at the same time, and only Meg has responded to me.
Right. When you donated something, you got a sort of incentive gift that was sent back. Well, what was sent back to me was a framed print.
Was yours broken too?
Yeah.
Mine was smashed.
Yeah. Luckily, I had a frame that fitted it, so it wasn't the end of it. But,
mine's just sitting up above my head, just up there.
Yeah.
Just above the calendar that we got off Ronnie through Keith Bettany. Yeah.
Just going back to the educational thing, what I forgot to add is that we are producing a DVD, which will go out to all of the schools. It's going to last about, well, you know what production things are like. We aimed for about 8 minutes, and it's now about 20.
Wow, but, that's good.
We're producing this DVD with sound clips from past veterans, where we've interviewed them, and we've got information about their experience and so forth, and also some of their wives who obviously didn't participate in any fighting, but they had an experience about what life was like in the Blitz and somewhere in the countryside, where life was just normal and so on and so forth. Anyway, this DVD will go out to all of the schools in Stockport in where are we now? October. I think the deadline is the 30th of September for final production. So we've got another week to get it ready.
Good luck with that. That sounds really good.
Yeah, I'll if it's appropriate, I shall try and make sure that at one of the meetings we can view it. I've worded with Ron about that.
Ray, are you interested in the art of captivity? Are you going to the next conference in June?
Yes, I've booked on that.
Yeah. Because I think the exhibition stays open till just after then, and maybe Meg is intending that people from the conference will also visit the exhibition, I presume.
Yeah. Well, Liverpool's only down the road from me, so I'm not. It's not difficult to get there.
No.
It was just that everything seemed to go silent.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I agree. Yeah.
Anyway,
but I know that Meg is very busy finishing off her book with Jeff Gill in time for publication, is what she said to me. So
I know we're all busy, and we don't, we do all of this work voluntarily, so it's not meant as a criticism. It's just an observation.
No, it's. I think they did pass it over to somebody else, and maybe it's just they're overwhelmed and doing things, because it's such a big thing to organise and to try and get all these pictures and that from quite a few places around the world. I should think that these wonderful drawings and paintings that were done under such incredible circumstances, and some were done afterwards, I know, but it should be fantastic. I don't know if I'm looking forward to it. So I shall probably have a bit of a emotional meltdown when I see what they did, if you know what I mean. I'm sure you do. But
there was a thing on Facebook which took me aback. It was somebody's father had, after the war, obviously the men were still bad and they had to go for treatment at different various places in the country. And this lady's father had went to Roehampton. And part of the treatment let them make things, and he actually made like this yacht.
Oh, the ship, yes.
Yeah, that ship. No, that actually took me right back, because I had one in the house. I was a little kid. I hadn't a clue where that come from. I just knew it was there. And when I seen that, it just straight away that was that ship. So obviously my father's been there for recuperation.
That was Roehampton, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, Roehampton. I don't think it was actually Roehampton. It might have been Liverpool, because he did suffer, that struggle
Oh, right, yeah.
Pretty all his life. And I think he had a recurrence of malaria as well. But he had obviously been to these kind of sort of classes, and they had built this yacht. He actually named it after my mother. It's just funny. But as I say, I knew it. But I didn't know where that come from. And when I seen that picture, that was it. I said, oh, that's where it was from. And I'd ask my sisters and my older brother, is that where that come from? I said, oh, yeah, did you not know that? I said, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
But that sort of thing that these men actually did make, where you can see about art, not just the men in the prison camps. This is part of their story as well. What they did afterwards as well. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. But before I go anyway, I've got to go in a minute there. I'd been on the Ronnie, and for the next book draw, I was going to put this up for the next book draw. It's called Prisoner of Nepal. It's by Ray Stubbs. He was a prisoner in Caliban camp. That'll be in the book draw for next month.
Yeah, I met Ray a couple of times. Ray Stubbs years ago, because he was part of the Birmingham group of it was just Far Eastern Prisoners of War. Then that my dad went to.
That's a brilliant book. As I say, that was one of the first books I was trying to get when I was starting to do the research.
And he wrote books. Yeah, he wrote other books as well, where he listed all the men that were captured with him, and his wife finished them off. There was a set of 3 books covering the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And Ray was in the Air Force, obviously. Yeah.
But probably do you have a list of their books?
The 3 books.
Yeah.
Yes, I've got them. They're in the cupboard just over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
Could you email us out, because I'll try and track them down, because as I say,
I think you could still probably buy them from Pam, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she published them herself. Yeah, I'll look that up for you when I get a chance, and I'll get in touch with you. I must set off and go and visit my mum and take her out for a birthday meal.
Yeah, I've got to go myself there. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. That was superb.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. Bye all.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.
Bye.